They screamed for years, "Release the Epstein files." That demand wasn't whispered in side conversations, it was shouted in the halls of Congress, plastered across cable news, repeated endlessly on podcasts, and turned into one of the most persistent rallying cries online. Supporters were told again and again that hidden inside those documents was the truth that would shake Washington to its core. The promise was that the names in those files would expose corruption at the highest levels and finally reveal the powerful who enabled Epstein's dark world. But when those files edged closer to public release, something very strange happened. The shouts of outrage began to fade. The fiery demands cooled into silence, and justice once again slipped behind a curtain. At the start, the movement to release the files looked unstoppable.
Files. During the Biden administration, this was cause célèbre number one for the extreme MAGA right. That there was some massive conspiracy to hide Democratic political involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. It was promoted and perpetuated by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino over and over and over again. It is probably the number one conspiracy theory on the online MAGA right. And it was pushed and pushed and pushed that they had to release the files, they should release the files. And Donald Trump was asked on the campaign trail, should the Jeffrey Epstein files be released? And he said yes. Donald Trump comes into office, and Pam Bondi releases a small portion of the Epstein files that had primarily already been public. There's an uproar on the right and by many, many members of Congress about why the Epstein files were not being released. Pam Bondi says, she writes a memo or an email saying that she wants an explanation for why there aren't more files that are released within 24 hours, and that within 2 weeks she intends to release them. Then the FBI spends tens of thousands of hours going through the files to redact them. Redact, obviously, what you would need to redact, which is the identification information and any other information about the victims. That lasts a couple months. All of a sudden, it goes quiet. It goes quiet. Suddenly, Congresswoman Luna and others who have been pushing so aggressively for the Epstein files to be released decide we're going to stay quiet. And all of a sudden, they're not released. Well, what do we learn next? Oh, we learn, actually, this whole right-wing conspiracy theory is BS. It is bogus, and Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. So now all of a sudden, the Republicans who were so aggressively intent on releasing the Epstein files because they were going to be a huge, explosive story about Democrats involved with Jeffrey Epstein are quiet. So the irony of these Republicans accusing the Democrats now of only being interested in this for political purposes is so thick that it is almost sucking us into the quicksand. But let's go a step further. Let's go a step further. Because now the cover-up is getting so deep and so intense that this committee, which has oversight over the Department of Justice and would ordinarily be the one that is doing this investigation, is running away from it. Why? Because Chairman Comer is the useful idiot who will do the cover-up for Donald Trump. And what does that mean? Oh, well, now there is an oversight investigation, but you know what they're not asking for?
Those kind of comments, and he knows that. Gentleman's recognized.
Now, the oversight committee is doing an investigation, but you know what they're not asking for? You know what you did not put in the rule to confirm that investigation? We're not asking for the documents that were used to open the investigation, who provided the information. They're not asking for witness statements, victim witness statements. They're not asking for recordings that may exist. They're not asking for any of the evidence that might include Donald Trump. And rather than acknowledge that you're just trying to cover up for Donald Trump's knowledge and involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein scheme, you're trying to accuse us of being interested. And there's one more point I will say quickly. This conspiracy theory that you pushed for years is bogus. And when it comes out to the American people that it is bogus, then they will know that all of your other conspiracy theories are also bogus. And your credibility is nil. And I yield back.
Claim 5 minutes. I would just point to the subpoena that Chairman Comer sent on August 5th of this year. I'm just going to read it. Now, frankly, I'll ask unanimous consent to put it in the record here. In scheduled to subpoena, in accordance with the attached schedule instructions, you, the Honorable Pamela J. Bondi, in your capacity as Attorney General of the United States, are required to produce the following documents and communications that are in your possession, custody, or control in unredacted form, except for redactions to protect the personally identifiable information of any victims, for any child sex abuse materials defined by the Department of Justice manual, or any other redactions required by law. And then there are seven sections here. Number 1, all documents and communications relating or referring to Mr. Jeffrey Epstein, Ms. Ghislaine Maxwell, and further relating to or referring to trafficking, exploitation of minors, sexual abuse, or related activity. Number 2, all documents and communications contained within the case file regarding United States versus Jeffrey Epstein. Number 3, all documents and communications contained within the case file regarding United States versus Ghislaine Maxwell. Number 4, all documents and communications contained within the file pertaining to the investigation of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida that resulted in the 2007 non-prosecution agreement between the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida and Mr. Epstein. So this would answer what Mr. Raskin, I think, has raised real questions about multiple times in today's hearing. Number 5, all documents and communications relating or referring to United States versus Jeffrey Epstein, United States versus Ghislaine Maxwell, and the investigation of Mr. Epstein that resulted in the 2007 non-prosecution agreement between the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida and Mr. Epstein. Again, answering, I think, getting to the information that Mr. Raskin seeks. All documents, number 6, all documents and communications between the Executive Office of the President, including the Executive Office of President Joseph R. Biden Jr., and the Department of Justice relating to or referring to United States versus Jeffrey Epstein, United States versus Ghislaine Maxwell, and the investigation of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein that resulted in the 2007 non-prosecution agreement between the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida and Mr. Epstein. And number 7, all documents and communications relating to or referring to the death of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. So seven but different bullet points. Every single one starts with the word all. I think the gentleman from New York earlier said that this wouldn't get the documents that started the, yes, it would. It covers everything. And the Oversight Committee has subpoenaed all that information. And it's coming in. I think there's 30,000 pages coming in, but it's a rolling production. This is the typical the way it works. We've done a lot of investigations around here. It's always a rolling production. So I think we're going to get the material. That's Oversight Committee is doing it. It's unfortunate that Mr. Goldman made the comments he did about the very fine chairman of the Oversight Committee, but he is getting the information that the American people asked for and that many members had demanded for a long time, including members on the Democrat side. So I'd ask unanimous that be entered into the record. Who seeks recognition?
I have an amendment after that.
Gentleman, the committee knows that's not appropriate, and we shouldn't have that kind of language.
And I'm here.
Gentleman, may proceed.
And I'm here to defend him as by far the best investigator of all time in the Capitol, which is exactly why all of his investigations, which have used, Chinese informants that were prosecuted and Russian disinformation, people from prison. I mean, the main thing he was tasked with last year, right, which was the Biden impeachment, that we had a vote. Oh no, we never had a vote on that because, of course, he didn't find any evidence. So this morning, our close personal friend, Mr. Comer, said that he was not going to look into the letter or the doodle, the president's doodle. He's a decent doodler, by the way. So he wasn't going to look into whether the signature was a forgery, and I'm concerned about that because this is the president of the United States. If there are forgeries or forgers out there, I think we should investigate it. And in fact, this document is 22 years old. So you're telling me someone 22 years ago went back to the future and forged his signature when he was a Democrat. And somehow this person was Nostradamus, knew he would become a Republican, become president 22 years later. So listen, I submit to you that we can solve this problem for the American people. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take our dear personal friend, Mr. Comer's word for it. Let's bring in a signature expert. You guys pick the witnesses. Bring in your signature expert, swear them under oath, and let's have the signature examined. Is it his or it is not his? We don't have to play games or The president says it's not his, we say it's him. No, let's bring in a signature expert, a referee, because we can't agree on anything, even when it's right in our face, of whether that is indeed the president's signature, or if it's a forgery, we should immediately open up an investigation into this forgery. I think that's...
Will the gentleman yield for
I
question?
will have absolutely yield to my esteemed ranking member, Mr. Raskin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moskowitz, for this point. I know that the President of the United States brought a $10 billion lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal for reporting about the existence of this. He denied that it existed in any way. What is the state of that litigation? I think, wouldn't we want that resolved before we move to a handwriting expert?
Sure. I mean, I assume there will be obviously depositions that get taken. I assume there will be production of documents. I assume as that case goes forward, they too will bring in their own expert to say it is not him. I just think, because we're in the middle of this investigation in oversight, even though, of course, this committee has jurisdiction over the DOJ and the FBI, but we all know that our chairman obviously only wants to handle, the real stuff. We give everything else to Comer. And so, I just think that rather than this drag out for weeks or months, is it his? Is it not his? Does he like to draw? Doesn't he like to draw? Right? Like, let's just get an expert in here to tell us. Listen, I'll tell you right now, if you bring in an expert, you pick the expert, you swear him up. If that expert tells us it's not his signature, I will accept the results. I will absolutely accept the results that it's not his signature and it is absolutely a forgery. But I'm willing to bet that we won't do that. I'm willing to bet we won't do that.
Lawmakers and influencers hammered the point every single day: release the files, reveal the truth, show the people who was involved. For many, the Epstein documents weren't just records, they were proof. They symbolized accountability, the hope that no one, no matter how powerful, could escape exposure. Millions believed that if those pages were unsealed, the mighty would fall. But the closer the files came to daylight, the more fragile the promises became. During campaigns, press conferences, and interviews, leaders made bold pledges. They insisted the documents should be unsealed, that the American people had the right to see everything. Those statements electrified supporters, who became convinced the files would destroy their political enemies and vindicate years of suspicion. The chants grew louder: transparency, justice, exposure. But campaign promises are one thing. Governing is another. And when power finally shifted into the hands of those who had sworn to fight for openness, they blinked. Enter Pam Bondi. Her name became central at this point in the story. She oversaw the limited release of documents, only a small batch, much of which was already public or added nothing new. At first, she carried herself as a champion of transparency. She even vowed that more files would follow within 2 weeks. That pledge sounded firm, almost defiant. People thought they finally had someone inside the system pushing to get answers. Behind the scenes, federal investigators worked tirelessly, redacting victims' names and combing through tens of thousands of pages. It looked like the door to truth was finally cracking open. But then, as quickly as momentum had built, it collapsed into silence. Weeks passed, then months. The loudest voices grew quiet, the same lawmakers and media figures who had built their reputations around the demand for release had nothing more to say. The outrage evaporated, the headlines shifted, and the public was left with little more than confusion. Why would such a powerful movement suddenly die down? Why would the urgency vanish overnight? Rumors spread that the files didn't just implicate convenient enemies, they touched names within their own circles. And when that possibility became real, outrage vanished. The hypocrisy was staggering. This was the precise moment when oversight should have mattered most. Committees with the authority to hold the Department of Justice accountable had the power to demand every record, every statement, every internal memo. They could have pulled the truth into the open. Instead, the scope of their work narrowed. Subpoenas were carefully worded to avoid the most damaging materials. Questions stopped short of the names that mattered most. The very institutions designed to ensure justice were bending themselves into shields. Pam Bondi's role became murkier with time. Her initial push for urgency never materialized. She had promised more files would follow, but no second release ever came. What started as momentum turned into stagnation, and her name slowly faded from the story. It was as if the silence swallowed not only the documents but also the people who once swore they'd deliver them. To cover the retreat, new distractions surfaced. Suddenly the national conversation was about whether a signature in the files was authentic or forged. Debates raged over lawsuits against major newspapers. These side stories were louder, more dramatic, and conveniently pulled focus away from the central issue. Why were the files still locked away? If there was nothing to hide, why not let the documents speak for themselves? Why fight so hard to change the subject? Meanwhile, the survivors waited. Women who had endured Epstein's network, who had suffered exploitation and abuse, were once again sidelined. Every delay, every withheld document, every promise that evaporated, it all told them their pain wasn't a priority. Their stories became background noise in a political drama. Justice, already fragile, was pushed further out of reach. And for survivors who had waited years to be believed, the silence was its own form of betrayal. But the truth of this scandal is larger than any single committee hearing. It reveals something deeper about how conspiracy theories live and die. For years Epstein's name was weaponized, proof of corruption and elitism. The files were framed as the ultimate evidence that rivals were guilty. But when the reality threatened to cut too close to home, the narrative collapsed. There were no apologies, no corrections, just silence. That's how disinformation sustains itself. It doesn't adapt to the truth. It buries the truth when it's inconvenient. And here lies the hypocrisy that should disturb every citizen. Transparency can't only matter when it damages your opponents. If it disappears the moment it risks exposing allies, then it was never about justice. It was always about power. Pam Bondi's early involvement showed how quickly momentum can vanish when political convenience is threatened. Her limited release, once framed as the beginning, became the end. Oversight committees still brag about subpoenas and the tens of thousands of pages slowly being processed. They call it a rolling production, a sign that work is underway, but volume does not equal truth. The critical pieces, the names, the statements, the recordings remain hidden. Instead of uncovering the truth, oversight has become a performance, a way to appear diligent while quietly ensuring nothing explosive sees daylight. This silence sets a dangerous precedent. It tells survivors that justice is conditional, that their suffering can be overshadowed by political strategy. It tells the public that accountability is negotiable, something applied only when convenient. And it tells future abusers that power is always enough to bend the story. The Epstein files aren't just records. They're a mirror, reflecting how quickly outrage can turn into complicity. The more you look at the timeline, the clearer it becomes. Outrage wasn't about principle. It was about utility. The files were useful when they were framed as proof against opponents. But when the possibility emerged that they implicated the wrong names, the files stopped being useful. And in politics, usefulness is often more powerful than truth. So the question becomes, why are leaders so desperate to keep these documents buried? Why does protecting reputations matter more than protecting the truth? Why was it so easy to scream for release one year, only to vanish into silence the next? These questions won't be answered in committee rooms. They won't be answered in neatly worded press releases. They can only be answered if the public refuses to let the matter go. If silence is the strategy of those in power, then persistence must become the strategy of the people, because justice doesn't survive in silence. It only survives when people demand it, again and again, no matter how uncomfortable the answers might be. And that's why staying engaged matters. Share these stories. Keep talking about them. Keep asking the questions politicians hope you'll forget. Because justice doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen when it's convenient. It happens when people force the truth into the light. The Epstein files were once the loudest cry in Washington. Today they are nearly forgotten. But forgotten stories have a way of returning. And when they do, the silence of those who once screamed the loudest will speak louder than any words. If you believe justice shouldn't stop where politics begins, subscribe, like, and join the conversation. The truth doesn't speak for itself. It needs voices willing to demand it.